John, is that that's the Colorado temperature pattern behind you.
That's correct.
I like it.
Well, they updated it through 2020 for the summer solstice, which they renamed Show Your Stripes Day.
Oh, awesome. I have a friend with a tie that is the global temperature record.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that, Peter.
Oh, I have a friend who has a tie that's a similar concept. It's the global temperature record.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of swag you can buy. You know, I have a button, but it was for a former year, you know, but it certainly does start conversations, you know, back when we had in-person conferences and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I just tell people, you know, it looks like a trend to me, and these are just temperature measurements, and we've had thermometers for a long, long time, and so, you know, it's not very controversial. You know,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Is that there's one earlier red line that's sticking out to me, and I'm wondering if it's like 1934.
I think that's correct.
Yeah.
The 30s. And then this, I think this one starts like 1895 or something like that.
And we haven't had a blue, it looks like, since maybe 93.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And, you know, the wet years in the early 80s show up as cool. Yeah. But I think the 1880s drought would be there with high temperatures also in Colorado. But I don't think this goes back far enough.
Yeah. Looks like maybe, yeah. Oh, it says right there, 1895.
Does it? Yeah. I can't, I just see a small.
Which a lot of the NCEI or National Centers for Environmental Information records, that's their baseline, is like they started in 1895.
So I'm signing in to Twitter here. So
Here we go.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the July Water Availability Task Force meeting. Give people till, say, 9:32. We'll kick it off. All right, folks, good morning. Again, welcome to the July Water Availability Task Force. I'm Tracy Kozloff, co-chair with Megan Holcomb, and for a change, I'll be introducing our speakers today. Megan's here. I'm sure she'll chime in when it's appropriate. But if I can, I'd like to just ask people to, instead of spoken introductions, go ahead and type your name in the chat to everyone and who you're here representing at the meeting. I don't have any announcements today, Megan. I don't know if you have anything you want to say to the group before we start with the state climatologist.
Nothing out of the ordinary.
Okay. So again, if people wouldn't mind going ahead and typing who they are and who they're representing in the chat, that would be helpful to us. But without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Peter. You're going to be presenting from the Colorado Climate Center.
Yes, I am up this month.
Thank you.
All right, let's see here. Okay, host disabled, participant screen sharing. So there may be a setting that you've got to tweak there.
Right now, your co-host.
All right, yep, okay, now it should work. Okay, and let's see here. You should be seeing like my Zoom screen or the Zoom demo thing. And then when I press this. All right, are you seeing my intro slide?
I am not. Is someone else? Anybody else seeing it?
And just
I
see
still
Zoom.
see your Zoom screen.
Okay, let me try something else. Sorry about that. How about now?
You did it. Thank you.
All right, and then just to confirm, if I advance the slide, still look good?
Looks good.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Tracy, and good morning, everyone. I'm Peter with the State Climate Office, and I'll be giving our kind of temperature and precipitation update. Fairly standard agenda. We'll be looking at recent temperature and precip stats and conditions. We'll talk a little bit about hydrological conditions, although you'll get a lot more of that from NRCS in the next presentation. I think I saw Carl's on the line today. No pressure, Carl, but I think that's going to be super interesting today. Then we'll talk about the outlook, kind of tease this idea of maybe second year La Nina, and then we'll look at some of our take-home points. So we'll start with some of the recent temperature updates, looking first at a broader scale and then kind of zooming in. So on the left-hand side here, we have temperature statewide ranks for the month of June 2021. And on the right-hand side, we have a table showing how everything has ranked for Colorado, particularly over the water year so far, where it says out of 126 years, that should actually say 127, so I need to update that. But the month of June was the 122nd coolest June, or you can think about that as the 6th warmest June on record for Colorado. It was definitely well on the hot side early on. We were kind of flirting with record territory through about week 3 of June. And then we had a nice cool down, which kind of brought us back down to earth. I don't want to, dwell on June as a particularly extreme month statewide for temperature, because it's actually been pretty much right in the range of what we'd expect over the last 10 years. 2012, 2016, and 2018 were all warmer, as well as, I believe, 2002, and one of the years much earlier, maybe even going all the way back to the 1950s. All right, if we look at the spatial distribution of that temperature pattern across our state, one of the themes that you're going to see throughout this talk is that really we have this much larger western region drought that Colorado is just kind of on the fringes of. And you sort of see that in this June temperature pattern, as well as many other slides that I'll be showing. So it was a record warm June for much of the Yampa and White River basins up in the northwest corner of the state, places like Moffett and Rio Blanco County. But then if we look at, say, the Arkansas River Basin, we see actually near normal conditions for the month of June. If we look at April through June, you're going to see a lot of slides where it looks like the east side of the Continental Divide and west side are telling pretty different stories. April through June was generally in the top 10% of the historical distribution for western Colorado, but once you get out onto the eastern plains, you actually see a little bit of below normal conditions. Much of the southern plains over the spring had a somewhat cool spring, and that bleeds all the way over into parts of the Arkansas and South Platte River basins. The slide for the water year to date, so October through June of 2021, water year 2021, looks very similar to the last slide, just the last 3 months, but some of the extremes get a little bit washed out. So you see above normal for most of the west slopes, but it's more top 33 percentile or upper tercile than it is top 10 percentile of the historical distribution. And we also see that much of the eastern plains is in the bottom tercile or lower end of the distribution. Here we have the influence of a very cold February, particularly for eastern Colorado out on the eastern plains. All right, here's the month of July to date. And again, we see that east to west gradient with the west slopes being on the warmer side of normal. We did set an all-time high temperature record in Grand Junction on July 9th of this year. It reached 107 Fahrenheit. However, again, if we look at the Arkansas Basin, we are seeing temperatures just a little bit on that below normal side. All right, now we're going to take a similar look at precipitation, starting with the broader scale view and then zooming in. This is looking at, again, the ranks for June of 2021 statewide on the left-hand side, and then the table showing each month of our water year on the right-hand side. So we see that June was a fairly normal month statewide in terms of precipitation, although there were definitely some winners and losers among that, and we'll get into that in just a minute. If we were to look back at, say, March through May, though, it was a drought buster for a lot of the eastern plains, but not the west slopes, and we'll dissect that a little bit more in a few slides as well. All right, here is our precipitation for the month of July, not quite to date through the 19th. Might be able to get you an update on this, and if there's important things to share, I'll talk about what's happened over how this has changed over the last week, maybe through the chat. But we can see that some of our wetter areas have been the appropriately named wet mountains just east of the Sangre de Cristos, where we have totals of 2 to 4 inches for the month to date, as well as parts of the eastern plains. The San Juans have done all right. The beginning of July isn't typically very wet for Western Colorado, but we really see things ramp up in the second half of July typically. And we're going to see that in the outlook here in just a minute. Flash flooding on burn scars has been an issue. We had an event take place on the Cameron Peak fire burn scar up near the headwaters of the Puda River just last week. And the meteorological ingredients that afternoon were not, they weren't textbook flash flood ingredients. We didn't have as saturated a moisture profile as we would expect for flash flooding. It was really kind of just a garden variety, high elevation thunderhead hitting the wrong spot. So that means that, we have to watch for these types of events on burn scars on a pretty regular basis. And then if we go back to the month of June, talk about some of the winners and losers, like I was saying a minute ago, certainly the drought in Northwest Colorado deepened throughout the month of June with fairly scant moisture. We saw some dry conditions out on the eastern plains. I'm going to guess following the May they had that some of the drier conditions may have been welcome out in Northeast Colorado in particular. Some of our wetter than normal areas in the month of June were in the San Luis Valley and down near the Four Corners, but it's worth noting that those areas, June tends to be the dry time of year, so it doesn't necessarily take a ton of moisture in order to push things above average during the month of June. And then here's backing up to the water year to date. This is another one of those slides where we see the difference between eastern and western Colorado, where the wet time of year in eastern Colorado is oftentimes late spring, and particularly in May, we really nailed that with our 10th wettest May on record, which was heavily focused on the eastern plains. And then, of course, we can't forget about the Pi Day blizzard, which really set the stage nicely for a good spring on the Northern Front Range and urban corridor. However, if we look out west, it was another poor snow year among other recent poor snow years. And so we see that those water year to date numbers are many of them in that 71 to 90% of normal range, and many of them even in that 51 to 70% of normal range. And this far into the water year, especially with a lot of the high elevations past their wet season, that can be tough to make up. Here's just a look at the last 30 days of moisture from some of our coagmet weather stations. I was interested to see just how well, for instance, our Westcliff and Canyon City stations have done over the last 30 days. Like I said, the wet mountains have done quite well, but these stations are not at high elevation. They're down in the valleys. So to see totals over 30 days over 5 inches, pushing 5.5 inches is really somewhat remarkable. So interested to see that wet spot really stand out, as opposed to with all these lower elevation stations this time of year, you might expect the wet spots to really be out near the eastern boundary of the state. All right, now we're taking a look at standardized precipitation indices on different time scales. I'll step through these pretty quickly. This is fitting precipitation to a historical distribution and evaluating if that distribution were normal, which it's not, how many standard deviations above or below normal would you expect it to be? The important thing to understand about SPI is it's evaluating how rare the magnitude of wet or dry conditions is. And where we see the cool colors, precipitation has been generally above normal, and where we see the warm colors below normal. The grays are where we see precipitation basically in the normal range. And if we look over the last 30-day period, we see that SPIs are generally positive over the high country, but that moisture hasn't necessarily worked its way out onto the plains or even the valleys of the west slopes. There are definitely some areas where we have seen flash flooding in the valleys on the west slopes, like near Montrose, but not widespread. If we back it out to 90 days, you start to see the dry conditions really creep in the valleys on the west slopes, but you also see the wet conditions creep in on the eastern plains. And then we definitely see that if we look at the 6-month SPI with those cool colors dominating the picture in the northeast quadrant of the state, and to some extent the southeast quadrant, with the warm colors dominating the northwest quadrant of the state. So, but really over the last 6 months, not terrible. It's where we get into the longer time scales that you see the remaining drought really stand out. Here we see SPIs that are in what we'd call the D4 range in much of northwest Colorado, such as Drought County, as well as the eastern portions of Rio Blanco and Garfield counties. So I mentioned that the warm colors were showing drier than normal conditions. What I didn't say is that they're color coded to sort of match the percentile distribution of the US Drought Monitor. So those kind of burnt red or burgundy colors are bottom 2 percentile conditions, or like a 1 in 50 year event, assuming a stable climate, which of course we don't have. And then if you look at the last 24 months, we see a lot of that burnt red across the west slopes. And this is where the long-term picture really comes into play. You know, we've had 3 of 4 snow years were poor snow years in western Colorado, although 2019 was quite good. And our recent monsoons have really been downers as well. So if you look long-term, you really start to see things fall behind across the west slopes and other parts of the state as well. So with that, we'll take a little bit of a closer look at the drought situation, particularly what the US Drought Monitor is showing, as well as some surface water conditions. Here is the most recent map for the US Drought Monitor, released July 2020 or July 22nd of 2021. The data go through July 20th. And like I mentioned, the Western US in general is pretty well in the trenches of this drought, and that the west slopes of Colorado are kind of caught in the mix there, whereas the good spring we had, at least for now, is holding eastern Colorado out of this. Spring was not a good spring if we look further north at the northern Great Plains, where the drought has really extended. Here's the current depiction, just zoomed in on Colorado, and you can see the epicenter as far as our state is concerned is more in that northwest area in the Yampa and White Basins. And then here's how things have changed over the last 12 weeks, or approximately 3 months, going back to the end of April. And we can see just how much things improved throughout the month of May, with some areas of southeast Colorado improving from as much as D3 drought all the way to D nada or no drought. Here's a look at the 3-month evaporative demand drought index. This is designed to capture the effective thirst of the atmosphere for water vapor. You know, the higher it is, the more quickly we lose water to evaporation and transpiration. And this is controlled by not only temperature, but also wind speed, cloud cover, and surface humidity. And we actually see fairly normal eddy numbers throughout much of the state over the last 3 months. In general, June was on the high side, May was on the low side, which makes a lot of sense. July to date, like I was showing earlier, has been a little on the hotter side, but we're seeing some areas where evaporative demand for July to date has been on the lower side. And that deserves a little bit of a closer look. I think humidity has a lot to do with that, but areas of, say, southeast Colorado, we're seeing both in eddy and in some of our coagment weather stations that evaporative demand has maybe been a little bit on the lower side over the last couple weeks. Here's a look at modeled soil moisture across the state. This graphic is just showing the top meter, and we're looking at percentile, and the percentiles are computed based on about the last 40 years of data. The brown areas are where you have below normal soil moisture. The blues are above, as you can see from the scale on the right-hand side of that graphic. And we can see that much of our west slopes, particularly the valleys, we have low, in some cases, record low top meter or root zone soil moisture. The San Juans, we've actually seen soil moisture percentiles creep up. That's not to say that the soil moisture itself has gone up. It almost certainly peaked directly after snowmelt, but it hasn't fallen or regressed as much during the summer as we might see in some years, thanks to recent moisture. And then this look at soil moisture is from the GRACE satellite, which I'm not actually sure what GRACE stands for, but we're looking at groundwater here, so a little bit of a deeper look at soil moisture, and we can still see a lot of the west slopes with very dry soil moisture, in many cases bottom 5 or even bottom 2 percentile. This color scheme is also designed for the dry side of the scale to match the US Drought Monitor. And then just a quick look at topsoil from USDA, 40% of the state showing short or very short topsoil. All right, that's all I have for drought conditions. Now we'll take a look at how things might change in the next week or months. So here is just our 7-day outlook. And I think this happened last time I presented in July in 2020, where we had a nice wet QPF for the next 7 days. The graphic here is showing precipitation anomaly for the next 7 days, which means that the green shaded areas can expect wetter than normal conditions, and the brown shaded drier than normal. Most of our state is covered in the greenish color, which is good to see. This is a combination of kind of abundant moisture coming up from both the Gulf of Mexico as well as the Eastern Pacific. And then it looks like, to give us our source of lift, we'll have influence from a weak cool front this weekend that's more going to affect the Great Lakes area, but the front reaches into the sort of Intermountain West area as well to provide a sort of lift for the monsoonal moisture that we have in play. And once that front comes through, we can actually expect some cooler temperatures with highs on the urban corridor in the low 80s, maybe even upper 70s, which will be a nice relief. I saw Kevin was on the call today. I know it's your time of year. This is the kind of pattern where we should be on alert with the flash flooding, particularly with all the burn scars. So Kevin, it's definitely your time of year. And this is just a quick look at the monsoon circulation. The right-hand side is just showing, or sorry, the left-hand side is just showing the 7-day QPF. And I like how you can kind of see this corridor of moisture that extends up from the western side of Mexico into Arizona, New Mexico. Sorry, was there a question?
What is QPF?
Oh, sorry, quantity precipitation forecast. So this is the 7-day rainfall forecast, and you can see the scale on the left-hand side of the picture showing the forecasted amount of rainfall in inches. And we can see the corridor of moisture that comes up from the western side of Mexico and gets up into the Intermountain West, where that cold front will give us a source of lift for the moisture, as well as some orographic influence, which should lead to some good totals in the mountains as well as other parts of Colorado. Particularly excited to see higher totals forecasted for the northwest corner of the state, which has been dry for some time. The graphic on the right is tracking the monsoon using the 54-degree dew point threshold that's often used at the Tucson airport to declare kind of when monsoon season starts and when it's over. And we can see from the red line is the average dew point, the blue line is what we've actually experienced, and the green line is that threshold. And we can see not only have we been above threshold for a while, but we've been above average for a while. So the monsoon is definitely in play at this time. On the 8 to 14 day time frame, we do see things expected to dry out. It looked like the wetter conditions this weekend may extend into that 7 to 10 day time period, so all the way out through the middle or even latter half of next week. But after that, models showing some confidence that another ridge will build in. It may be a little bit for high pressure ridge, which tends to keep the moisture away from us. We may see some smaller disturbances kind of make a dent in that ridge, but hopefully it doesn't build out like it did last year, where we saw a big high pressure ridge build out about the second week of August last year that just parked over much of the western US. And that's, of course, when we really saw the fire season hit its stride, so to speak. And then here is the seasonal outlook. This is looking at August through October. And discouragingly, we can see a bullseye of increased chance of below normal precipitation over the kind of western half of the Intermountain West, including western Colorado, a tilt towards below normal precipitation for eastern Colorado, though not as big of one. And actually, this is largely due to what's expected later in September and October, where there's less of, if you look at August alone, it's more equal chances. So there's less of a tilt based on what's supposed to happen with the remainder of monsoon season, and more of a tilt based on what's supposed to happen when we start to get into our fall season. And that's largely to do with the chance of a second year La Nina, which La Ninas generally bring us drier falls, but second year La Ninas in particular tend to be dry. 2018 was a second year La Nina, as was 2012. Shoot, I thought I had a couple more slides on La Nina, the forecast probabilities. They may have actually been hidden in my slideshow for some reason, but I'll just go ahead and discuss what they show. The probability of a second year La Nina is somewhere hanging out somewhere in that like 60 to 70% territory, based on some of the kind of ocean model ensembles. And if it's not a La Nina, it'll probably just be neutral conditions that are kind of La Nina leaning, but not enough La Nina to declare a La Nina, just sort of neutral leaning towards the negative phase of the El Nino Southern Oscillation. So El Nino for the coming year, I would say at this point, unlikely. All right, now I'll go ahead and take a look at some of the precipitation accumulations from some of our key stations for the water year to date, as well as projections for the rest of the water year. And these are based on climate subregions that were designed from an analysis by Klaus Wolter. We'll start in region 1 with Grand Lake and work our way around. Actually, I think we start with Fort Collins, but we'll work our way around from region 8 back to region 8, going counterclockwise. And Fort Collins, we see we had a really nice wet spring, but the last couple months have been quite dry despite some of the moisture we've seen other areas in eastern Colorado. But based on the projections, we expect to stay above average for the water year. The dashed line shows the average precipitation in a given water year. The black line on these graphics shows the actual precipitation, and then each gray line shows a trace from a previous year. For instance, this really high trace would be the Fort Collins flood year of '97. And then the stippled green line shows what an average projection would look like, and the purple and brown lines give us the idea of what your average range would look like. All right, with that in mind, we'll keep going through some of these graphics. Steamboat in Northwest Colorado, way behind for this water year. Only 13.33 inches for the water year to date. That's only 65% of average. I'll have to look up, see what how that ranks, whether it's the lowest year on record or not, I'm actually not sure off the top of my head, but it's certainly near the bottom of the distribution. And then we don't see any traces from previous years where we catch up. So if Steamboat were to have a normal water year, it would have to be because something unprecedented happened. Somewhat similar situation if we look at Grand Junction, Walker Field, well below average. Most of our traces don't get us back to average for the water year. We did have a pretty good March, but and then a decent November, but other than that, it's been a dry year so far. This is Mesa Verde National Park down in Southwest Colorado. We're only at 8.92 inches for the water year to date, as opposed to an average of over 14 inches, so only 63% of average. Then we see that all the traces are below average, leave us below average. Okay, I see some text on this. Oh, shoot. Sorry, I just lost you there. Okay, let's see if I can get you back. All right, sorry for the technical difficulties. Am I back?
Yep, you're back. We see Pueblo.
Great. All right. I think that Pueblo was a little bit ahead of where I was, so we'll go back to Alamosa. Yeah, Alamosa is above average for the water year to date. We see that they had a nice spring, and then most of the projections keep us above average for the water year. Pueblo as well, good spring, summer with really nice moisture at the end of June, as well as throughout the month of May. And the average range would keep us well above average at the Pueblo Memorial Airport. Walsh is just barely on the positive side of average. We'll see what happens from this point forward, but standing in a pretty good position. And then Akron, I'm sorry, some of this text is left over from last year, so don't pay attention to that slightly lower than 2011, 2012. That is not true. Akron is well above average thanks to a banner May, as well as a pretty good April. The recent weeks have been fairly dry. I would hazard to guess that some of the drier conditions in June were welcome, particularly for things like winter wheat. I would also hazard a guess that for, say, corn crops, especially in dry land, it wouldn't hurt to have maybe another storm or two before the harvest gets here. And then Boulder's sitting in a pretty good position as well, with some better moisture in some of the recent weeks, like the end of June, than other places on the Northern Front Range. Oh, there's the El Nino forecast. Okay, it just got a little bit shuffled. All right, I'm a little bit scrambled, but here are the summary points for the day. Between spring and summer, a lot of Colorado did receive decent moisture on the short term, but we're really seeing that there are many, many long-term impacts and effects still in play, especially on the west slopes for this current drought, which is part of a greater western region drought. And I think you're going to hear a lot more about that in the next presentation. Like I mentioned, 3 of the last 4 snowpacks have been on the low side of average, and 4 of the 4 last monsoons have been on the low side of average, with western Colorado particularly dry over the last couple monsoons. So the impact of that is really showing up in groundwater, and as well as stream flows and reservoirs, which you'll see here in the next few minutes. This monsoon is shaping up better than some recent years, particularly this next week coming up. But the next winter, it's possible that a second-year La Nina could add to some of the drought impacts that we're already seeing. It is early to really be ringing the warning bells on that, but it's something that we'll want to be looking out for. All right, so that's all I've got for you today. Thanks so much. And if there's any questions, comments, I'd be happy to field those.
Questions, comments for Peter? Hearing some quiet, or not hearing in the quiet. Well, thank you, Peter. That was really helpful, although maybe not the best news. We put in the chat some reach out to Kevin or Treste. Thank you for your thoughts about the floods and debris flows that you guys already added into the chat. I just wonder if you have anything else you might want to share with our group, things you're thinking about.
Well, this is Kevin. I guess I'll start here. This has been an interesting summer. I don't know that I ever remember a summer where we had more flash flood warnings from the National Weather Service than this year. They've of course been, I think, mostly burn scar related, but there's actually been quite a few that are not burn scars as well. So it's been a busy summer. Looks like this next week or 7 days probably will be fairly interesting, but I guess what I took from this more than that is that it looks like it's going to dry right back out after that. And, you know, I remember sitting in this spot last year, looking at a dry week ahead and then thanking our lucky stars that we hadn't had a bad fire summer. And then, of course, we all know how that turned out after August 1st. And I guess I'd just be curious from the weather folks that are on here, what your thoughts are kind of moving forward into August and beyond. I think what I took from this presentation is that it's not looking good. And I'm just wondering if you have anything more specific that you can comment in regards to the fire threat.
I mean, I'm definitely concerned about the fire situation right now. I can pull up the fire outlook for the month of August, but it looks like for particularly the northwest corner of the state, above normal chance of significant wildfires, and then even in September, above normal chance for, again, the northwest corner of the state. Yeah, you're right. I remember telling the media about this time last year that for as bad as the drought had been, that we'd actually gotten pretty lucky with fires, and then things really turned in a big way, which was, didn't have a historical precedent. Typically, our largest fires occur in late June, maybe early July, in years where we have a poor snowpack. They kind of hit that window between the cool season and the monsoon. So my hope is that if we have a decent monsoon, I mean, it's not going to completely reverse this long-term hydrologic drought, but a decent monsoon can do wonders for suppressing fire conditions or giving them less of a window to occur. So if we get some good moisture in this next week, you know, maybe we can hold off. But yeah, it's definitely a concern moving forward.
The monsoon, I'm sorry, just real quick, Kevin, just looking at your 7-day, or thinking back to the 7-day precip forecast that you have put up, Peter, the monsoon maybe doesn't tend to stretch up into northwest Colorado, that area with the greatest fire threat. I guess I'm not recalling exactly, but it seems like it tends to be more focused in southwest Colorado, the monsoon.
That is true, but in this case, I actually think that there will be some decent moisture up in northwest Colorado, just because of the combination of that cold front that's coming through. It looks like we're actually going to see some better totals up all the way up into Wyoming. So hopefully that helps with things, but still the fire weather outlook not so good. I think that the fire weather outlook, it's not necessarily looking so much as at individual events as much as the larger, longer term picture. And certainly we see that northwest Colorado is in a pretty deep long-term drought right now.
I'm sorry, Kevin, I spoke over you.
Oh, that's okay. Peter, I also kind of was wondering if you could touch on the whole La Nina situation. I guess one of the things that I'm surprised about in this drought situation, you know, I think a lot of people think of La Nina as bad for our state, but it seems to me that I recall that La Nina can actually be kind of good for northern and northwest Colorado. And it seems like that's the bullseye of where it's the worst in our state. So is that unusual? And then also you talked about the possibility of a second year La Nina, and I seem to recall, I can't think of an example of where that's ever been anything but bad. But is that, do you have examples where that may not be the case?
Yeah, so with the first question about La Nina and its influence on Northwest Colorado, you're completely right that, you know, while El Nino tends to be better for our state in most cases, really spring, summer, or fall, El Nino tends to be better for the state. But the example where La Nina is, you know, better is in northern and northwest Colorado, particularly over the higher elevations in winter. And of course, that's probably their most important season, it's when they're getting their snowpack. So a good La Nina could be good news for the places in Colorado where things are the worst. However, that signal tends to be more mid to late winter. I think that if we looked at fall in particular, like what we're seeing in the 3-month outlook, we wouldn't really see that signal yet. We'd still see more the drier signal from La Nina. So maybe some of these outlooks will get a little bit better for Northwest Colorado as we get into winter, if a second year La Nina does develop. The recent examples of second year La Nina have been pretty grim. I don't have an example off the top of my head where it's been good, but I can do some digging there. I do want to say, though, second year La Nina, fairly small sample size. You know, if we have a record of ENSO of, you know, a little over 100 years, 120 something years, you'd probably only pull out like 8 to a dozen good second year La Nina examples to point to. So it's enough of a sample size that it's a little bit, it's concerning, but it's not enough of a sample size to feel like we know everything there is to know about second year La Ninas.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't want to be the wet blanket here. I just want to be realistic, but it just seems to me like, based on this possibility of a second year La Nina and the current conditions that we already have in the state, this feels to be very much not good news to me.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's not the news I want either. Particularly for the folks on this call, I wouldn't say that my news is all bad. I mean, recent months have really improved things in eastern Colorado, and you know, if I was sitting in the position of, you know, a water provider in the Denver metro area, I don't know if I'd be freaking out just yet, because things have been looking better recently. But certainly in terms of hydrological and ecological drought out on the west slopes where things are already bad, any sort of news that it could get worse is not good news.
Any other questions or comments or input? Trustee, I don't know if you have anything you might want to talk about.
Let's see, I just wanted to agree with Peter and Kevin. Yeah, it looks like it's moistening up Friday, especially, and then it looks real good for Saturday through Tuesday. Still some moisture through the 5th, next Thursday, and then it does look like it's drying out. The thing is as is typical with the monsoon, you have a number of locations. They've done better in the mountains, but even on the eastern plains, which luckily aren't in drought now, but and even in the mountains that are still below normal. So it's been kind of a hit and miss on precipitation. So that, along with everything that Peter and Kevin have talked about, is definitely a concern as it dries out again the rest of this summer and into fall for wildfires. And I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and before we turn it over to Carl, I just ask if you joined but weren't able to put your name and organization into the chat. If you could do that, that would be helpful. But otherwise, Carl, if you want to take it away.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
And
we
the
can see
screen
your
is
slides.
up.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone, as usual. Yeah, a lot of what I'm going to go through, you know, more looking specifically at the mountains, is certainly going to reinforce the trends Peter was talking about. But I'll just kind of go through our standard roundabout about the major basins, and then kind of do some big picture overview stuff. Yeah, and I will, whoops, let me see. There it goes. Apologize in advance. We were having some USDA network issues. So a lot of these products I wasn't able to run since last Friday. So I'm a little old, and particularly in southern Colorado, it looks like they did receive some more mountain precipitation over the weekend and possibly even yesterday. But still, most of it paints a pretty good picture of what's going on. So starting up in northwest Colorado and the Yampa White and North Platte basins, as Peter mentioned, has remained to be one of the drier parts of the state over the last couple of months. You can see here, primarily the kind of ring around the North Platte Basin has received the least mountain precipitation. Some of these sites on the divide with the Colorado Basin have gotten a little bit more, but in the big picture, still has remained one of the drier basins in the state. So we can see here, June remained extremely dry, just 36% of average precipitation. July to date, a little bit better, but still the driest in the state at just 60% of average. And that has left our water year precipitation at 70%, going back to last October. So this is looking at reservoir. Traditionally, this would be one of the bar graphs that I was not able to access. So I kind of had to scramble and pull together what reservoir information I could out of our interactive map. But not a ton of storage up in the Yampa White, currently 82% of average reservoirs. And I also will note, I did pull out the actual volumetric streamflow forecast information this month because we haven't produced them since June 1st, and we're kind of coming up to the end of our standard April through July forecast period. So at the end of the presentation, I do have a fair amount of information on observed stream flows. And then in here in just a few days, we'll have that July information, and then next month, or whenever the next meeting is, we'll be able to kind of go over some of the forecast review and how things really did end up panning out with the really dry soil moisture conditions going on. But moving along to the Colorado River Basin. July precipitation has been a little more sporadic. Again, some of these sites up near the North Platte are on the low end. Some of the sites on the southern end of the basin received pretty respectable precipitation. I'd guess a lot of this is driven by elevation. I didn't really get a chance to dig into that, but we'll kind of see across the state a general south to north trend, getting progressively drier as we move north overall. So current water year to date precipitation in the Colorado is 78% of average. June remained quite dry at just 66% of average. July has picked up quite a bit, at least at above average conditions so far in July. And we'll also see this across the state pretty much right after our last meeting when things were looking even more grim. The very last week of June there did see a lot of mountain precipitation across the state, which was a good boost. As I'm sure we all know, we'll take whatever we can get, but good to see July picking up. Reservoir storage in the Colorado is actually doing quite well, pretty near average at 94%. Couple on the low end down here in the south, but overall storage across the upper basin is looking pretty encouraging right now in the big picture. And I'll talk a little bit more about some interesting reservoir things going on in the greater upper Colorado later, and imagine there's folks on the call that know more than I about them as well. But we'll get into that in a bit. So looking at our long-term trends, not as low as we've seen in some of our major drought years, your 2002s, 2012s. We can see the effect of our very low stream flows with very little boost from the spring snowmelt this year, and has been kind of declining off for the last couple of months. Or very little boost really throughout this water year at all, I should say. Moving over into the South Platte Basin. Similar to the Colorado, quite a few differences site to site in how much July precipitation we've received up in the mountains. Looks like some of the lows down near just 50% average up in this drier basin divide with the North Platte. Down in the South Park area, we've got 155% average. But all of that across the whole South Platte Basin is evened out pretty good for the month of July so far, at barely above average conditions. And again, we'll see this quite commonly, but very dry first 2/3 of June, and then things have really started to pick up, with June ending up at 89% of average precip, and the total water year to date at 96%. Which I believe is the best water year precip in the state that we have received so far. Reservoir storage is looking pretty strong. As Peter mentioned, hopefully that's good news for water providers across the Northern Front Range. Currently 109% of average reservoir storage, with not really a ton of outliers on the low end at all. I think I see maybe 187%, but reservoir storage relative to average conditions is looking quite strong. Going back to our long-term trends, actually saw some pretty solid increases throughout this water year. You can see we started the water year a fair bit below average, but it has been pretty steadily climbing, with just maybe one very slight drop here in the last month or two. But very different trend than we'll see in other parts of the state, so that is good to see. So moving down onto the western slope into the Gunnison River Basin. Really, really good news for pretty much all of Southwest Colorado that the July precipitation really has picked up quite a bit. As for the last 2 years, that's the quadrant of the state that has certainly been the driest. With looks like up on the Grand Mesa, couple sites nearly double of normal July to date precipitation. With the exception of just a few down here in the south, pretty uniformly well above average July to date precip. So June ended up given that little boost at the very end, right at 100% of average June precipitation, and July has been at 156% of average. So nearly double the July precipitation so far, which is great. Still lagging behind on the water year quite a bit at just 77% of average since last October 1st. Reservoir storage is certainly on the lower end, and I'll have a little bit more about this in my summary slides, but currently just 66% of average reservoir storage, with Blue Mesa, our largest reservoir in the state, at just 55% of average. I imagine people are aware of this, but there is also a plan to release more water out of Blue Mesa than they commonly would to help buffer the power production pool on Lake Powell, which is getting to be extremely close to a threshold. So that'll definitely hoping for a solid precipitation this fall and snowpack this winter across the whole upper Gunnison to help boost those Blue Mesa reservoir storages back up, as well as obviously just help water resources in the region. So we can see in our long-term trends here, really big drop through the second half of this water year and getting into the range of some of the lower years we've seen. This graph's going back to 1992, and it really only looks like there's a handful of years with basin-wide reservoir storage getting about as low as we're getting to. So it's certainly something to be watching rather closely this year and the next. Moving a little further south into our combined San Miguel, Dolores, Animus, and San Juan basins. Again, the San Juans have been doing pretty good overall with respect to July precipitation. A lot of sites over 150% of average precip, a few lower, but really good to see with how dry it's been down there overall for the last couple of years. And I'd assume that could be attributed to some of the monsoon stuff that Peter was talking about as well. So June ended up right about average, 103% of average, which is great to see. And then July has been 169% of average. So still on the low end with respect to the whole water year at just 76% of average, but again, we'll take anything we can get at this point in the season. So it is encouraging to see that precipitation coming in and hopefully give the whole ecosystem a little extra water as we continue through a prime fire season. So looking at reservoir storage, again, apologies pulling this from our other map. It kind of splits up the basins a little bit differently, but 52% average reservoir storage in the upper Colorado Dolores. And these are referring to Huck 6 basins. We commonly combine these three together. In the upper San Juan, including Navajo Reservoir, it is 76% of average reservoir storage. Going back to our long-term trends, pretty similar patterns that we see in the Gunnison with the major drops around 2002, around 2012. And it really, over the last 2 years, basically has been pretty precipitous in the reservoir storage dropping. And again, getting into that range of some of the lower years since we've seen going back to the early 90s. It looks like kind of at a point where there's only kind of 3 time periods that got down lower than where we are now. So again, need to watch those resources very closely over the coming year, and realistically probably more with the deficits that we're looking at. Over into the Rio Grande Basin. Didn't get quite as much July precipitation so far, but pretty good up on the crest of the Sangres here, really throughout the Sangres. Near to above normal. This one southernmost site at 190%. This one's pretty much right up on the crest near Sand Dunes National Park. And as Peter has mentioned, the wet mountains right over here seem to do pretty well. Then kind of a little more sporadic, getting more into the eastern San Juans, but averaged across the whole basin, July has been pretty good, 153% of average. June didn't end up so great. Got that little boost at the very end of the month, but was pretty much flatline before that, ending up at 83% of average. And all said and done, with our water year total is at 89% of average accumulated. Looking at reservoir storage, a lot more sporadic site to site. This upper Rio Grande Basin is actually, this is the New Mexico state line here. So the Rio Grande headwaters is primarily what we're used to looking at. But some way up high, I'm guessing this is actually Rio Grande Reservoir, perhaps not, but 124%, and then some quite a bit lower, down to 26%, 59% of average. So kind of on the low end of reservoir storage across the state still. Not terrible, but certainly still on the lower end. Go into our long-term trends. Rio Grande certainly had several time periods where it was at lower levels than we're seeing now for kind of longer periods of time, but we're still getting into that range of some of the lower values we've seen over the last 30 years or so. So still more snow and precipitation over the coming year will be more than welcomed by folks down there and on downstream, I'm sure. So moving on to our final major basin over in the Arkansas. Really even more variability in some of the accumulated July precipitation to date. This is up on Pikes Peak here. Our Glen Cove site is on the lower end at 86% of average. A couple sites up in the headwaters, near averaged up to 180%, and then kind of several in the middle. And yeah, and we are, I believe as I mentioned last month, sometimes we do end up missing a few data points while we're performing our summer maintenance and updating the data from site changes. So apologies for missing a couple data points here. Some of these are actually newer sites that we don't have the normals calculated yet for. But look at what the numbers look like. Pretty similar over the last 2 months. Very near normal overall. June at 104% of average. July to date at 99% of average. And on the whole water year basis, pretty similar to the Rio Grande at about 89% of water year precipitation. So really not terrible compared to other parts of the state, but again, we'll take more as long as it doesn't impact flood concerns or things like that. Reservoir storage, compared to all the major basins, is kind of in the middle of the pack at 79% of average. Some of the smaller ones up here, probably Turquoise Lake, is 88%. John Martin is just at 39% down here. Pueblo's at 106% of average, which is pretty good. But not the best, but not terrible. Kind of right in the middle of the pack statewide. Going back to our long-term trends, you can see it has been kind of rising throughout the second half of this water year. And really looking back to around 2000, really in a fairly normal range of what we've seen. Those full percent of normals are a little offset by these really high years through the mid to late 90s. So not an abnormal reservoir storage situation in the Arkansas. Okay, so going on into some of our big picture statewide stuff. This is going back to our month-to-date precipitation at our mountain stations. And you can kind of just see the general trends of the Gunnison and basically all the San Juan mountains have received a pretty fair amount of mountain precipitation over the last 3 weeks or so. Going up into north central and northwest Colorado, certainly the driest portion, kind of along the Continental Divide, along the Northern Front Range, right in the middle there. So our total statewide water year precipitation is currently at 82% of average, with June being a bit below normal, but again, quite a bit better than some areas, quite a bit worse than others, but 77% of average. And July to date has been 113% of average across all of our mountain snow tell states. So here's looking at a map of that. And again, we have seen some big discrepancies. A lot of these numbers are kind of to be expected and what we've seen in the snowpack, but what we've been seeing in the resulting stream flow has really been affected by the multi-year drought situation and extremely dry soil moistures in various areas, namely all across Western Colorado, from the Yampa White really all the way down to our southwest basins. So that's really some of the major discrepancies that are really, really important for folks to take note of, is that the multi-year drought has greatly impacted the relationship we commonly see to snowpack and precipitation to how that's actually resulting in water in our rivers. And reservoir storage, some more dramatic differences for sure. statewide is 83% of average reservoir storage, but again, it really matters more locally what basin you're in, specifically with us being a headwater state, but rather low down in southwest Colorado, ranging from 55 to 66% average across the Rio Grande, our southwest basins, and the Gunnison. Again, Arkansas, like I just mentioned, kind of in the middle of the pack, and then kind of near to above normal reservoir storage across all of northern Colorado. So really, this again, kind of in addition to stream flow, really shows the effect of that multi-year drought in the different regions, as opposed to just strictly our water year precipitation. So here's some of our longer term trends, not longer term, our water year trends in reservoir storage. And again, we can really see in a lot of southern Colorado over the last 3 months, pretty major declines, storage in the Gunnison, pretty major declines in storage in the upper Rio Grande, really just over the last month, primarily in the Yampa and White, with the South Platte really being the only basin that's showed a pretty steady net increase in storage over this current water year. And a lot of this has averaged out statewide, again, at 83% of average reservoir storage across all of Colorado. And similar to that last bar graph, we can kind of see this is our last water year right here. Some slight declines is maintained pretty steady, but really not a significant net increase at any point throughout the water year, and it's kind of just been tailing off, largely driven by some of those southwest basins. So I've just got a couple slides here doing kind of a review of some of our observed stream flows. So this is looking April 1st through July 30th. And again, in just a few more days here, we'll be able to start compiling our data for that full April through July primary snowmelt season. But base flows seem to remain pretty low across the state, so I'm expecting a lot of these trends to continue. We can see down here really all across all of western Colorado, very, very low percent of average total stream flow volumes. Like Yampa at Maybell, just 32%. Gunnison at Grand Junction, just 37%. Colorado Cameo, 54%. Animus, 51%. Dolores, around 30% of average. And then definitely getting better in other parts of the state. But it certainly does show, I think it's really important to see how low these really were. And I've got another slide to kind of provide a different perspective, but in a lot of these areas where water year precipitation, basically seeing about a 25 to 30% discrepancy between normal water year precipitation and the stream flows we're observing. And again, the presumption is that it is a result of the extremely dry conditions going into the snow accumulation season. But things certainly a little better across the Northern Front Range, 80 to 90%. Down here out of the Sangres, some pretty good stream flows, some even up above 90% of average. So highly variable, but really, really seeing the impacts of this extended drought in our observed stream flows across the western half. So here's just another way to kind of put it into perspective. This is looking at our percentiles of observed stream flow. So as opposed to just what the percent of normal is, this compares year to year on the period of record. And it certainly does provide quite a bit of insight. With one of them, like again, our Yampa at Maybell, I know has over 100, excuse me, 110 years of record, and it's in the second percentile there. We can pull up rankings as well too, but Gunnison at Grand Junction, 6th percentile, Colorado, 4th percentile, really many in the lowest 5 percentiles, lowest 10 percentiles across the state. So just thought I'd put that out there as just a different way to look at the data and really put it in a historical context of really how low these stream flows have been. So So my last couple slides here, wanted to touch on this. And again, there's likely people on the call who are far, far more knowledgeable than me. Just read a couple articles recently that there is a plan to start moving more water downstream from Blue Mesa, Flaming Gorge, as well as Navajo Reservoir to buffer the storage in Lake Powell, because there is concern about it getting low enough to really lose its power production capabilities. So this is a graph of period of record Lake Powell storages. And you can see where we're at now is really only 1 year resulting from those early 2000s dry period that is lower since it first filled up in the late 1960s. So kind of a fun fact, but also pretty unprecedented and a little concerning. And something here in Colorado specifically to watch, or folks in the Gunnison Basin most specifically, that they are anticipating bringing out, I think they're planning on bringing out an additional 36,000 acre feet for Blue Mesa or something of that nature to help buffer Powell. But also a good reminder with that, you know, we are all part of the greater Colorado system. And, you know, it's, we are the headwaters here, but with so many reservoirs, they are trying to manage this whole system down through Powell and Meade. But a pretty unique and unprecedented situation to be that concerned about just maintaining the power production at Powell. So I thought I'd just kind of add that in, looking at that whole period of record since it first filled. This is a little more cluttered, but just wanted to show, since I was talking about it, where we're sitting with Blue Mesa. Not certainly as dramatic looking as Powell, but where we're at now is certainly getting in range of some of the lower storage values we've had going back to kind of the mid to late 1980s. So we've certainly had lower years and lower years recently, but again, something to watch pretty closely, and especially if additional water is to be taken out throughout the fall. So just my wrap up here. It's great to see the amount of precipitation did increase that very last week of June and has been pretty steady throughout July across most of the state, kind of with exception of the Yampa, White, and North Platte. Particularly some of the parts of the state that have been especially dry across much of southwest Colorado received pretty favorable precipitation over the last 3 weeks, which is great. Again, as with some of the maps I just showed, really our observed stream flows have been incredibly low compared to the period of record. And again, many, if not most of those sites are at least have 60 to 115 years of record. So if they're in range of the second, third, fourth lowest, it's certainly something to take note of. Again, with reservoir storage, statewide 83% of average, but did see very considerable declines over the last several months, noticeably in the Gunnison and Upper Rio Grande, which haven't been storing the most in the state so far. So definitely hope for more moisture there. And again, in addition to all of that, these planned releases from some of the major basins above Powell, or major reservoirs above Powell, excuse me, will certainly something to be watching as we go into fall, winter, and even next spring snowmelt runoff season. But that is all I had, and I'd be happy to take any questions if anyone has them.
Any questions for Carl? Okay, hearing none. Are folks seeing the agenda up on your screen now? Okay. We'll take that as a yes.
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. All right. right. Well, now what we'll do is move into the next part of our agenda where we'll get an update from Megan about the impact task forces and their activation. And then for those who maybe haven't been to very many of our WATF meetings, what we do is a roundtable, and we'll want to hear some reports from water providers. I know this month I'm particularly interested in hearing from some of our West Slope water providers who are here, because that's not always the case. So pretty happy to see that we have a number of folks from the West Slope here. We'll be interested to hear your reports about your concerns, conditions in your systems. Also, we'll want to hear from the East Slope folks, especially if there's anything unique or surprising happening. I think our expectation is that you guys are, for the most part, in a good situation, considering that the East Slope conditions have been better this year. And I thought I might also ask if Joel Sneakoth or Robert Sakata have any updates as well from the agricultural community. So that's just sort of the overview of what we're going to spend probably the last part of our meeting talking about. And if I could turn it over to Megan to talk about our impact task forces.
Thanks, Tracy. I just can be brief around impact task forces, but we do have an upcoming drought task force. That's the director level meeting once a month. That will be on August 2nd, and we will be reviewing basic conditions, recent actions, near-term actions for the state. And then on Wednesday, August 4th, we have the next municipal water task force, where we have various representatives around the state, water providers, and different regional groups that focus on municipal water impacts. And then their next agricultural impact task force is on August 19th. These groups are set up, specifically the municipal water and the ag impacts, to be a responsive body to on the ground impacts that we're seeing, making sure that we can hear from the ground up where folks are needing support, either rapidly or long term, and trying to make sure that we can be a liaison to all of the appropriate state, federal resources that help support our communities. So continuing to do that, it is likely that we will shift those conversations in both groups towards the challenge of quantifying the impacts of drought, because this is consistently a challenge that as this regional drought for the entire country carries on, there are more conversations about engaging federal partners, FEMA, a presidential drought declaration, et cetera, that are under consideration. But the question always comes to, can we quantify for our state and our communities what the economic impacts are? And that's a challenging question for drought. So we'll be utilizing those groups to help us really move forward as a think tank for the state on how to do that. So those are my main updates. I might, hand it off to, Robert Sakata, if you have any other thoughts. You're participating in both of those calls when you can.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Yeah, I think that the drought tour that you're planning will be important as we get some on the ground stories to present to people. I know here on the South Platte, I think the calls are really active now on the river. Most of our irrigation canals are in sections. As Peter mentioned, I think it was the dry weather that we've had has been beneficial to the wheat farmers who have been harvesting, but now our crops are getting drought stressed because of the lower river levels. So we're also hoping for some monsoon moisture, but of course we're always a little hesitant because a lot of times we'll get the hail instead, which is the worst of two evils. So but everything else is going well. So thanks for all your work on that.
Thanks, Robert. Joel, do you have anything to add?
Well, yeah, the dry weather's been nice for harvest, but we went from feast to famine out here on the Eastern Plains. Near record April, May precipitation to virtually nothing here for the last month and a half. We are starting to see some rainstorms, but they've been spotty. But where they've been hitting good. I know south of us, about 30 miles, what was that, 2 nights ago, they had over an inch of moisture, rain, flash flood warnings out and about in certain areas. But to give you a little hint on the moisture situation, since 1st of June, everybody was really optimistic about the wheat, but there are pockets that had extremely low test weights, which shows how dry the last month of fill was. Because we should be seeing 60-pound test weight wheat. I know Burlington and I can't remember where the other one was at. They were sitting right around 50-pound test weights, which puts you into the point of where they won't accept that wheat into the elevators. It's feed grain quality. I know down just south of Akron, I saw several trucks pull into the elevator and they pulled out without unloading because they were low test weight. So we were lucky here. Akron is actually probably one of the better parts of the state for the wheat harvest that we've seen around. We just got a little bit of enough moisture, had enough subsoil to carry us through with good soils here. So irrigation's full swing. The only problem with irrigation is trying to find parts for certain things with this whole COVID situation. We've got parts for pumps that are typically in stock that are sitting 3 to 4 weeks out. So that puts a kibosh on stuff. Other than that, waiting for some moisture to help us out. I'm tired of irrigating already this much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both for the input. And before we go do a roundtable for the municipal water suppliers, I did want to just give you guys an update from Colorado Parks and Wildlife. We weren't able to get a representative from CPW here today, but Rob provided us with, he wanted y'all to know about CPW's new fishing conditions page, and it includes a link showing all of their current fishing closures in Colorado streams. And he wanted to note that Colorado Parks and Wildlife is monitoring impacts to 3 species of native fish in Southwest Colorado. So they're looking at the round-tailed chub, flannelmouth sucker, and bluehead sucker, which may experience significant population level impacts in the Dolores and San Miguel basins this year due to low flows. So sounds like bad news. Thank you, Megan. Appreciate Megan's fixed the link there. So so that was the CPW update. And now, if you guys don't mind, I might just call in some different folks I see have joined us from the West Slope. If you don't want to talk, that's fine. You're just welcome to say I don't have anything to report. And then we'll move to the East Slope water providers. So let me see. Can we start? Chris Wolf, you still with us from Eagle River Water and Sanitation District?
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Okay, awesome. I have headphones and I can't really sometimes hear their noise canceling to the point where they cancel my own noise. Yeah, so up here, headwaters of the Colorado, but along the Eagle River, we've been seeing some nice little monsoonal moisture here, there, really sporadic, but it's been very nice to watch the river come up a bit here or there and then go down. We've had some really interesting little pops of moisture that have closed Glenwood Canyon a couple times, some mud flows. We had actually a little mud flow across Highway 70 in Avon. So though it's kind of a pain, obviously for moving and commerce and driving around here, I'm happy to see it. And I'm happy to see the river going up here or there. All in all, we're trying to hold off from any drought implementation or drought restrictions for our customers. but we are definitely focusing on outreach and engagement efforts that are geared towards removing outdoor irrigation. We want people to be able to take showers and flush toilets and drink water, of course. But our main issue up here is ensuring that irrigation is limited and that we're only using what we need to use and no more. So that's our big push right now. Fingers crossed that it doesn't dry out as much, because we'll see outdoor water use go up. We are trying to get ahead of that, and we've been working on that all year. Overall, our storage is not terrible. It's not necessarily my realm. I'm more on the efficiency side, but what I've been hearing is that all in all, we're doing okay, not great. And we definitely need, I think like everywhere, except for maybe the Front Range, more water. But even the Front Range, I feel like we could all use a little bit more rainfall. So that's what's happening up in my neck of the woods.
Thank you, Chris. Wondered, Karen, are you still with us from Town of Telluride? Not. I saw DK from Colorado River District. Not some of our organizations. You're not necessarily municipal water providers, but you represent groups of water users, and so you can report in that manner.
Sure can. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for all the information. We've been really concerned, obviously, with our watersheds in the Colorado River Basin and its tributaries. You heard about things in the Yampa. That's really some of our main focus, because there's very little storage up there to begin with. We're anticipating the call to come on there, so that means additional impacts to our agricultural users. We will be using some of our storage to offset and hopefully allow water use to continue. And as you heard, that's going to be the focus of the Drought tour, which we will be participating in. Elsewhere, you also heard that reservoir storage is holding up, but we're very concerned that we will have essentially no carryover storage going into next year. So that's a main concern and focus for us. Our growers are doing pretty well in the Grand Valley and the Uncompahgre Valley because of storage, but it's extremely concerning on where we're headed. So the other thing that you just heard, the Upper Basin is experiencing quite a few of these afternoon thunderstorm events, monsoonal flow driven. We've had pretty significant debris flows, one which actually covered the entire Colorado River in Glenwood Canyon. We're still trying to figure out how to work with partners to reestablish a safe channel that won't impinge upon I-70. That's the main infrastructure that's being impacted. You know, I could probably leave it there if there's questions, but really hoping that the monsoonal flow will continue and that we'll have a snowpack this year return to normal, and with that second La Nina favoring the northern basins, which really need it. And I know Ken Curtis is on or was on. He can speak better to Southwest and their issues, which are very dire.
Ken, thank you, DK. Ken, are you still with us? I see he's with us, but he's muted. Maybe we'll try someone else. And Ken, if you are able to give a report, we'll welcome that later. Amy Huff, are you still with us? From Southwestern. All right. I didn't highlight anyone else from the West Slope. So anyone else wants to speak up, I'd welcome that. Otherwise, like to shift over to the East Slope water providers. So then, just because you turn on your camera, could we start with you, please?
I'm making sure the equipment still works. As Peter and Carl had shown us, it's a nice year to be in South Platte Basin as a municipal water supplier. Things definitely have improved here. We've gotten some timely precipitation events, and that's really helped out with keeping our demands down in Highlands Ranch. So even though we didn't get as much yield during the runoff season, our demands were also down, and quite frankly, got nothing to complain about here on the south end of the South Platte Basin. So our storage is probably 5% lower than it typically is. We're at 46%. But as I say, our demands are down. So actually looking at taking off our drought watch rating for our drought conditions.
Sorry, what is that, Swithin, taking off the drought watch?
We implemented for drought response, we implemented a drought watch in late April, May, and just with where conditions are at and the lower demand we've seen this year, I am pushing for us to remove our drought watch condition and stick with our full-time permanent conservation program.
Great, thank you. That I hadn't heard about that one before. I thought maybe I could call on Jason from Denver Water. I know, Jason, you've taken some efforts to pull together some groups of municipal water providers and talk about communications.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. Hi, everybody. So, yep, Jason Fineout from Denver Water. I'm our water shortage preparedness manager. And yeah, first I'll start with the Front Range Drought Coordination Group. A lot of you guys are familiar with this, but just as a recap, what we did is Denver Water and Aurora Water partnered together to start trying to get providers all together inside of this group so we could be on the same page. We started this thing back in February when conditions were just as bad for the East Slope as they are currently for West. And the group was formed initially as reactionary to the drought to report out on potential restrictions and to talk about what everyone's systems were doing. As Swithin mentioned and you all have seen, of course, the Eastern Slope has now transitioned into more of a communications than a reactionary position. We want to make sure our customers understand that there's still a drought going on in the state that still impacts us, even if they don't see it outside. And so because we moved from reactionary to communications based, we also switched facilitators. So I have stepped out of the role of facilitator on the emergency side, and Darren Knowles over at Northern Water and then Greg Baker at Aurora Water have stepped in as facilitators on the communication side. And again, our focus is to create these talking points that every water utility on the Front Range can utilize so that their customers continue to be efficient. We really want to try to streamline our communications and streamline those general talking points. So that's where the group is now. If we, or I say when in the future we get back into a drought situation, then I may transition back in as facilitator. But we're just very flexible as far as you know, what this group is working on. So that's that for the Front Range Drought Coordination Group. For Denver Water, we're in a very similar position. What Swithin was talking about. We actually have above average storage. We're at 98% of our total storage that we could have. Normally this time of year, we're at 95%. So it certainly has been a good year for us as well in the South Platte. Demand is also down, or actually I should say it was down. So for April, May, and I'm sorry, March, April, and May, we were 10 to 14% below what our expected use was, but now we're just right about on average. So it has evened out, but we're not above like we were last year. And so we're just communicating to our customers to conserve and waiting to see what happens next year.
Thank you. Can I call on Emily from Northern Water?
Hi, Emily Carbone, Northern Water. I know that Darren has been working on that messaging. I don't know too much about that, but I know they're working hard on getting some good consistent messaging on the drought. And then our total storage as of July 1st was just slightly above long-term average, but it was a bit below what it's been for the last, what?
Emily?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe was this just my internet? Could I just trouble you to start over? I had trouble hearing you.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Can you hear me okay now?
I do, thanks.
Okay. So our total storage as of July 1st was just slightly above the long-term average, but it was below what it's been for the last 7 years or so. Deliveries to CBT water users through the end of June were about 95% of average. And we're pretty concerned about the conditions on the West Slope. We're glad that there is some benefit from the monsoon. Hope that that continues and that the snowpack is good next year.
All right. I wonder, maybe at this point, I just maybe should open it up to Front Range water providers who maybe have something different or unique that they want to report, other than what we've heard from some others who might be in a similar situation. Is there anyone else on the call we've missed who has some information you want to share with our group?
Tracy, I would just mention something I forgot over here in response to some of the late afternoon monsoons. We've beefed up our early morning system for our municipal providers to signal changes in water quality. In conjunction with the USGS, we really have a lot to be thankful for in terms of real-time pH, turbidity, dissolved oxygen, even dissolved organic matter. Those are some new instrumentation that USGS has been able to mobilize. And I wanted to also give a shout out, if it didn't already happen, to Kevin and his team. The Colorado floodthreat.com website. We've been really looking at that carefully, using that. And I want to thank Kevin and his team, Dewberry, for putting that out. It's a great resource for us to kind of see what's happening. And it looks like it's lighting up this week into the weekend for us. So we're kind of on a medium to high alert for additional debris flow events that could impact our water users.
Thank you. Ken, I see you've showed up on our videos and our audios.
Yeah, Tracy, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's great.
Sure, I'll give an update. I know you were going around and I was a little distracted with a couple of side calls there for a moment, but I've been trying to follow and it was a good update today. As reported, the monsoons have been pretty beneficial to the Southwest. It's not a game changer for this year, as in we've actually shut down most of our irrigation, not all of it, but we're probably most anticipatory about getting the mountains in good shape and then following this double La Nina year and seeing how the snowpack. What we have definitely realized in 2020 and 2021 was those dry soil, warm, dry springs that really killed us. So the rain's very welcome. They actually took off fire restrictions in the San Juan National Forest. And we're lucky to not have the problems DK was just mentioning, where we have avoided the we have avoided the significant forest fires since the 416. And so we seem to be in pretty good shape. And if it keeps the forest fires out, that's one big risk off our plate. And then it'll all be about the winter snowpack with good preceding soil moisture. So welcome rains, but we're writing off 2021 and looking towards 2022.
Okay.
I think all our M&I providers are in decent shape, as most of us work off of reservoirs. And as you reported from CPW, probably the biggest forward-looking impacts are ecological, particularly below the Dolores, McPhee on the Dolores. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions or input from folks on the call? Gonna have the next WATF meeting will be Tuesday, August 24th, 9:30. And I guess without hearing anything else, I'll just thank everybody for the really good input. Nice to see a few of you, and let's have some nice moderate rain. So
Monsoon is good.
Hail
bad, but it's water. Yeah.
No hail. Yeah. So thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks.